Good morning. And if it's not morning for you, good day, good evening. I wish you good. I figure that's a kind of a broad brush way to start this talk. Can you tell I'm nervous? I am. I would like to move what we've been talking about in these somewhat technical talks to something more practical. One of the more difficult things that I have had to try to figure out, and I'm still trying to figure out after all these years, is how to teach something so complex. Many people study a modality, a way of practicing therapy, healing, and so on, and the licenses for professions generally refer to that. Now just consider what that means. It means that if you are a talk therapist, as that's my license, then you are licensed to try to affect people's lives by talking. And then if you go down into, well, what style is that? What modality? What a weird word, but what style of practices are you going to use? Are you going to use, for instance, are you going to try and persuade the person and get them to see the irrationality of their logical mind? Cognitive therapy. Are you going to try and affect them by getting them to do behaviors that challenge the way they normally do things? Behavioral therapies. Are you going to make lists of things where you're trying to, list problems and goals and solutions and things like that? There are a lot of those things. DBT, things like this. Are you going to try and access the visual part of the mind and then talk about it and try to use those other kinds of things, reasoning and behavior and so on? And there are many of those. Alphabet therapies all have those, and EFT comes to mind. Now, in case you haven't realized it, what I am going to be talking about in this talk and the next series of talks is how do you affect a mind? How do you help people? How do you help people to become more of what they want to be, or etc.? And just the general sense of what that means. And honestly, most people do not reach a point where they see how emergence is different from those things for quite a while. People who start new with me as a therapist, especially people who have never been to therapy before, don't realize the differences because they acclimate themselves to sitting with me or a therapist like me. But people who have been in therapy before, and especially people in the talk therapy profession, have come to the idea of emergence with a lot of ideas which contradict it or which are the opposite of it. So what we're going to talk about in this talk, the first of a series, is what is it that emergence does as a therapy? Now we're setting aside emergence as a personality theory. We're setting aside emergence as a scientific method, constellated science. We're setting aside the two mathematics that I discovered. I don't even know how to talk about it because they're there already, but discovering that they exist is not the same as inventing something. So I don't see myself as the inventor, but rather the discovery of a pattern for the way things can be measured, described with mathematics. But all of those things, I'm setting them aside, which is a lot of what we've talked about so far. And I want to just focus on, in a sense, where this all began. Now, some of you might be wondering why I said I was nervous. Well, the first thing that I'm going to talk about, or the thing I'm going to talk about in this talk, really doesn't refer to any of the drawings that I have done, but I am going to, at the end, talk about probably one of the first drawings that I drew based on this story. And the story I'm about to tell you is one I get nervous in the few times I've ever told it. Well, why? So I have been claiming, and I'm very confident in, the idea that everything in emergence, which is a broad umbrella, that word, everything that refers to having epiphanies, every way that epiphanies can affect lives, every way, all began with my roughly 11 years, 10 plus years of sitting meditation every day, and the drive for that being that I was suffering terribly. And when I look back now, I didn't see it then, when I look back now, my mindset, the way I described all of this, was from what I loosely refer to as the medical view. Now, please don't hear me saying that doctors are all idiots or anything like that. That is not what I'm saying. But what I am pointing to is that it's a philosophical position to believe that our lives, our suffering, etc., all comes from our symptoms, and if you eradicate those symptoms, then we're healthy, happy, etc. Well, this in general is the medical view, and a lot of that is just coming from human nature. It is not coming from a mistake. It is inaccurate up to a point. And the inaccuracy has to do with how long the positive improvements last. What do I mean? Well, everything in emergence, as you've been hearing me say to the point where you want to throw something at the screen, is based in a two that are one. And what is the two that are one about therapies and the medical profession in general? What is the two that are one? Well, one view is that permanent improvements should be the goal. Permanent improvements. Many people would agree with me about that. But very few people watching this would actually know that improvement, those improvements that you can make, fall into two categories, temporary and permanent. And one of the main problems in what I am talking about in this already rambling talk is that few people in any of the professions realize this, or let alone make a distinction. Sometimes people say it when they are faced with putting their child on an ADD medication or something like that. And they say, I don't want the medication, I want this situation to be changed. In some cases, medication is absolutely warranted, absolutely. If a person cannot do a talk therapy, we're limiting it right now to talk therapy, but if a person cannot do talk therapy, then medication is something that should be considered. Why? Well, because the medication will, hopefully, if administered well, the medication will temporarily decrease the symptoms. You hear the word, temporarily, while you're on the medication. Now, the body, being the body, has a use for symptoms. And a two that are one about symptoms is, well, what's the upside? Why should we have symptoms? Yeah, and if you're practice in the everyday person sense, something like Buddhism, as I did, at first you practice it because you want to get rid of your symptoms. You want to get rid of your suffering. And the promise is if you can accept things the way they are, then you will. But that statement, while it is absolutely true about Buddhism, as far as I can see, it doesn't describe a difference between temporary and permanent changes. The irony is that when you hear the beginner story, the beginning of the young prince, and he's been protected up to this point in his life, and then one day he goes outside of his compound and then sees the suffering in the world, he has an emergence. Now, that don't use that word in it, but emergence means epiphany. He had a realization. And now what those words all mean is permanent change. That is what an emergence is, an epiphany, an aha moment. Now, how many therapies focus on giving people epiphanies? Other than the therapies that derive from emergence, the principles, the philosophy, the personality theory, the science, the math, other than therapies rooted in those things, there are none. Many people would get mad at me right now. People listening to this knowing nothing about emergence, they would say, but wait, what about things like psychodrama, Moreno family sculptings? I did those, hundreds of Moreno family sculptings, and I learned from doing those things that then led to emergence. I have no problem giving credit where it's due. And had I not done those, had I not been taught, and had I not done those for my first 2 years, hundreds of them, I would probably not be sitting here right now. What was it like? Well, I would have first of all, it was a group of more than one family. 5 families to up to 8 families in a room. Big room, multiple families. There would be multiple generations in the family. Minimum of a teenager who was in treatment and the parents, but often the siblings, sometimes grandparents. I remember one time a boy had no family and a priest came as his family, etc. Okay. And then the idea of it would be that I would pick somebody who wanted to do the work, and I would never directly say what that was, but I had a reputation very quickly of doing unusual things that were not thought possible as far as making changes in people's lives. I did not know about the temporary or permanent. I just knew I was changing lives, and that it was really, I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the idea that it could be done this way. So what was going on? Well, I would have somebody, they would come up, they would sit in a chair, I would stand next to them, and then I would ask the person, for instance, to pick somebody to play their mother. Now, their mother or father would probably be in the room, but they would have to pick somebody from the other families. So a mother from another family would play his mother, and another father would play his father, and so on. So another boy in the room would play his brother or sister, etc. And then what is it like? Well, when those people are chosen one at a time as they come up, I would then have to design a way for the person to do a physical act or something that talking as a repeated single line, something physical to represent the problems that this boy had with, for instance, the mother. And let's say that the mother, the boy said to me that he always felt like the mother was pressuring him to be more than he could possibly be. I might have the mother stand on to the left side of the boy and put her hand on the boy's shoulder, her right hand, and put her hand on the shoulder and push down gently and not let up. So what am I doing? I am creating a physical representation of a mental experience. Now, since I did not get trained by Moreno, I don't know whether he'd approve or disapprove. I think if he watched, if there were such things, videos of what I did, I think he would probably be happy with that. I have taken what he did and am changing lives. I'm quite certain that that's the truth. But the point of this is that during this period, and this is in 1988, 1989, 1990, I am gaining a lot of experience as a therapist. I am supposedly a talk therapist. I don't have a license yet. I have a credential of an alcoholism counselor credential, etc. But I do not have a license yet. But I am doing these things that are under the umbrella of talk therapy. And I'm talking a little. I'm describing what we're going to do. But the biggest thing that's going on here is that I am creating physical representations of mental things. Now, a little digression. After all this talking that I've done to you, and you're probably going, "What, get to the point?" My own brain is saying it too, so I'm with you. Get to the point. The point right now is I have been trying to tell you for the past, I don't know how many talks, 10 or so talks, that everything that I have discovered has started from a drawing. That I do not sit down and write about the things that I discover and then make a drawing to represent it. I make my discoveries by having these life experiences, those first 2 years in the rehab being the strongest foundation, where much of it's come from. I make drawings that represent things that my whole body feels, but I have no words for yet. Now I want you to see how that mirrors how babies learn. They do the same thing. They have life experiences, they touch things, they smell things, they taste things, they move things around, they look at things for intense periods. I love the way babies look at things. And that was me, and that is me. And I'm still like that. So what I inadvertently discover in this 2 years that I work at this rehab, and I do multifamily groups, 4 days a week, 4 of the 5 days, and then I do, the fifth day I teach like 150, 200 people, kind of like a TV quiz show where the guy walks up and down the aisle and stops and talks to people in the, from the aisle and so on. That was me. I did a lot of that. But the point is that when I was doing those psychodramas, the Moreno family sculptings, the standing in the room and getting a boy or a girl, a teenage boy or girl, to ask other family members from other families to play their family members, what I was doing was getting each of those people to represent the relationship that the boy saw that he had with that mother, that father, that brother, and so on, to represent it with a physical representation. Sometimes a father would say, I know you can do better. And this would be what the boy would say was hurting him. And I would have the man that he picked to play his father stand on his right side, and every once in a while, intermittently, lean down and say, whisper in his ear, I know you can do better. I know you can do better. Now I'm welling up as I say it. I know you can do better. Because this is from my own childhood. No matter how well I did, if I got a 97, if you tried harder, you could get 100. And I'm half laughing and half not laughing because there's still pain about it. And I certainly don't blame that my parents wanted me to be the best that I could be. But that wasn't how it was phrased. And they weren't at all trained in any of this, and most people are not, most parents are not. I was certainly not. So I did those kinds of things to my own children, and to this day I wish that I hadn't. But going back to this idea of talk therapy, the drawings, etc., here I spend 2 years doing many, many hundreds of groups with between 5 and 8 families and doing these Moreno type family sculptings, at least one a day, among other kinds of group multifamily groups in those days, but those, and that I would be making physical representations of mental things. Now, let me add a second kind of group that I did. I, during that time, fell in love with the idea of making genograms. Monica McGolrick's work, her books, she's an amazing person. And the idea of genograms as a way to see past your own small circle of suffering, to see, historically how this spreads out. This had many effects on me. But what did I do? Well, I didn't do genograms as a therapist, like sitting down there and drawing on a paper and asking them individually, for, their father's birthday or what the illnesses in the family were, their culture, their ethnicity, things like that. No, I did this in multifamily groups, and each family, in the week that I would see them, I would do a sequence of 4 days with each of the families. No, each family would have a big 3-foot by 4-foot piece of, one of those big speaker pads kind of things where they do it in talks in front of big rooms, and they have the flip pads, but they're 3 feet by 4 feet. Well, I would have them paste them up on the walls, and I would do genograms with them, and they would do the genograms together. And what would that do? Well, for anybody who's not seen one, it's like a family tree. And if you've seen any software online about family trees, it looks like those, because that's where those family tree drawings come from. And they would contrast and compare their family with another because they could see the representations on the pages. So for instance, many people have deep in their family history a shame about having been a minority when their family first family members came to the United States. Many people have this. And many people, I would have them draw as an umbrella across the top of the genogram, their ethnicity. And I remember a family who drew their ethnicity like it was the most proud thing they have ever done. And it said Puerto Rican. And their family was proud of their heritage. Do you know, in 2 years and having done 700 families, so not 700, because they're multi-family groups, but hundreds of these genogram sequences, that's the only time that I ever saw a family have that kind of pride about their ethnicity. To this day, it affects me. It gave me an emergence. I didn't even know what it meant then. Okay, so we have begun, if you can remember, talking about therapy, emergence as a therapy. And we then talked about the idea of the medical model, which doesn't discern between temporary and permanent symptom relief. Now, then I am talking about what is different about emergence as a therapy, and that the idea that emergence, that the goal is permanent change. Now you notice I'm not just saying symptom relief, permanent change. That's very important. But I also said that when a person cannot do talk therapy, or even the kind of therapies that I did, the experiential ones, then that medicine is something that should definitely be considered, and consulting with a psychiatrist who is open-minded about these things and sees that their role is not permanent symptom relief, but rather to enable the group, the group of us, the talk therapist, the psychiatrist, whoever else, an educational consultant, and so on, the group of us to all help in a broad way. So the problem, of course, is that most people on the medical model see symptom relief and as the goal, and they never say in a lasting way or meaningful way that symptom relief is mostly temporary. What happened in those groups that I led was that I, without knowing it, this is the way that I learn. I learned like a baby. I learned by doing. I got taught beginning points by my then supervisor, Nancy Kennedy, and she was so awesome because of her years of Al-Anon. She did not try to regulate how far I went. She told me, I'm there like a month, and she told me go do this. And only years after I'd left the rehab did I learn that, well, you're not allowed to do that. It takes like 10 years for you to study this and then finally lead on your own. But Nancy let me do that in a month, and I did it. And because I knew so little about the theories and so on, I didn't know what not to do. Because I had had years of AA, Al-Anon, and have a few years under my belt of Buddhist meditation and so many other things, I turned to doing something that wasn't based in logic at all. The thing itself by design is not. Moreno family sculptings are designed to make mental things visible by creating physical representations. And this is what my drawings do. They make mental things visible with physical representations, but they add a lot. And ultimately, when I began to make the drawings, and the first diagram of the first manual cover, that in the first talk, right, the two that are one drawing, I began to take the things that I was realizing in those groups and my studies and so on, and things just kind of got put together. One of them being blamelessness, the other being that the position, the physical position and colors, shapes of lines, that each of these things needed to have its complementary opposite. That's not in normal talk therapies. You know, for instance, let's talk about anger. I mean, this is a symptom. People come frequently and say to me, I'm such an angry person and I need to work on my anger. I remember a woman who came who said, her husband said, you're such an angry person. You need to work on your anger. Well, when I sat with the woman, I could see right away, this is not an angry person. This is somebody who's getting pissed off at a husband who's a total asshole. And why do I say that? When I normally, it's not blaming, I'm just reacting. I'm still mad because the guy was a pathological liar. And when I did sit with him, the one time I did, my heart just broke for this woman because she was so willing to do the work that she was willing to believe that she was a person who she wasn't. She, in fact, had a lot in common with me, which is that, well, right now anyway, I have anger in me. But it takes so much to get me angry. But then when I flip, people are really affected by it because I'm so not an angry person through most of my life. As I sit with them, they know me to be a relatively calm person. And so seeing me get angry, seeing her get angry. Anyway, what's the point? The point is she came and she says, my problem is that my husband says I'm a very angry person and I'm here to work on my anger. Where's the two that are one? There's actually three of them here, but I'm just going to point out one. I asked the woman about her anger, and this is me gathering sound. Yes, they're words, but sound and body experiences from her as she talks. Now I'm watching, I'm taking all this in from all my years in that, all those groups I did, those 2 years in rehab. I know to let my body ingest her body, my sensations, my reflections in my own body, of the sound of her words, of the position of her face, and to take them in like a baby, learning, not to take them in and test it against some chart of what those things mean. No, my own meanings. What does it feel like? And so she's talking about the anger, and I am demonstrating, it just happens to me, empathy, because there's such a strong connection between this woman and myself, because I had been told that so many times myself. And I was very similar to her. And she could see that I was not one of these detached therapists. I certainly wasn't writing on a pad, taking notes, but I wasn't one of these detached therapists. I was affected by the things she was telling me about anger. And the looks would be, perhaps looking like guilt or shame or remorse or regret or, many things. Okay. But then I paused and I said to her, so you see anger as a bad thing? And she said, like based on all these things that I'm telling you, those things are all, they're painful. And I asked her the two that are one question, the first one that came to mind, which is, what do you think it's like for people who cannot be angry? What do you think their lives are like? Now, hopefully you're considering this, instead of just trying to learn from the words I'm using. That's not enough. You're not going to have an aha from my words alone. You have to picture things. You have to see the equivalent of the drawings in your own mind. You have to. And you have to then also see, gee, I can't see a picture for this, which then means you don't know how it constellates. Oh, you have the experiences, but they're more raw materials, like they were for me in my first few years as a therapist. Raw materials. And I had wonderful raw materials, and those people were so giving to me, giving honesty, time after time. So here's this woman, in that first session, and she could see that she had this inhibition, that she wasn't allowed to be angry, even though she was reacting to things that were being said to her. She wasn't allowed. Anger was bad. And she couldn't come up with any times where she should be angry, where anger was a good thing, necessary thing, a human thing, not just a mistake, something that's positive. Some people might see this as cognitive therapy because of the way the words are arranged. Oh no. Oh no. One of the things that's inherent in this is the amount of space that I have when I ask such questions. The allowing it to seep into the body. But the idea of these two that are ones has a history in talk therapy. They're labeled paradoxical interventions. Paradoxical interventions. Creating a condition wherein there's a puzzle in the mind that, in emergence theory, creates ambivalence that can't be let go. Ambivalence. And in the effort which all human beings make to resolve that feeling, which the experience of ambivalence is what we refer to loosely as neediness. Every time you're needy, you are trying to make a decision between two things. It's an unmade decision where there are a pair of opposites. In this time, she then felt the ambivalence between, she's being told she's such an angry person, and she's hearing me say, a person who was openly admitted to her, me too, and not in a small way, and she's hearing me ask a question that changed her life. I asked her, if someone hurt your child, she at that time did not have a child, but if you had a child, a young daughter, and somebody hurt that daughter, would your anger be a positive thing? Do you know, cognitive behavioral views are that it would impair your ability to think properly and handle the situation. Can you hear what bullshit those words are laden with. I picture words on a page and just throw cow pies at the thing and see it dripping. Those words do not cause emergences. They cause repression. They cause the person to hold in their humanity. Am I angry right now? I am. I am indeed. I am. But you're not hearing me blame someone. You're not hearing me say, those cognitive behavioral therapists, they know better. They shouldn't be doing this. No, I am not. I am not saying that. What I'm saying is that there is a better way. And the better way involves teaching human nature, teaching a person human nature. And this woman who came there, who was excessively influenced by her husband into believing that she was a very angry person and needed therapy. She had not had it before. Needed therapy. This was one of the lies that the man told because he didn't want to deal with his own insanity. And the truth is, he didn't know. People who were pathological liars are rare. Somehow I have met 3 in my life. They do not know. I have searched for an understanding of this in human nature for a long time, and I have none. I do know that there is a time in human nature where people, where children do this, where they have, made up friends and they tell you things and they're trying out ideas that they hear adults say, but they don't have a direct connection to life, invisible friends and so on. I suspect that somehow the person is stuck in doing that there's a certain thing they fall in love with doing it, they get a positive response, people laugh, etc., or something, and they continue. But that's not the point. The point is about the woman, not her husband. The point is that she and I worked together for perhaps 2 or 3 years after that. She's one of my favorite people that ever came to me. If she ever watches this, I obviously am not revealing any material that would identify who she is, but so that she would know that this is who it is, because she might think, no, it's not me. The person's name was Kelly. She has a daughter who was born and was in a ICU, whatever they call that, the baby thing, for like 3 months. They didn't know that she would live because she was born premature. She has a stepson, and she is a god-awfully good mother. I wonder what it would have been like for her had she not come and been told that she needed to work on her anger. Does Kelly still get angry? I suspect on a really bad day she does, and I rather like it. I rather like it when she can be herself. But does she know that she's not overall, in general, an angry person? Well, I haven't talked to her in a long time, but I certainly hope so. But I can tell you from the time that I did see her, because after that initial years she would come back occasionally, she eventually got married again, got divorced, got married again, blah, 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 through all these things. But I could see and probably not even count how many permanent changes had occurred to her. Now let me leave you with this. What makes this so important is that temporary changes are knowable in a simple way. There is a simple test. There are always tipping point based tests to test for results in emergence. The tipping point based test for temporary change, it always involves willpower. Why is the willpower necessary? Because the willpower is contradicting, it is impairing, it is going against the person's actual nature. Their nature if they were unwounded? No. Their nature because they're wounded. And the wound alters their nature in such a way that they can't learn about their nature in that specific area of life. Now, what I just said is complicated. If it broke your brain, let it go. Just simply think about the idea that if you have to use willpower to keep symptoms from being there, to keep your behavior in line, etc., regardless of the way that you have been taught to do this, a therapy, a book, a seminar, and anything, the willpower proves that your behavior, the way that you normally would act, is your actual nature at this point in your life, including the things that you were as a baby all the way up to any injuries that are impairing your ability to see your true nature. But this is your personal nature in the present moment. Now, take in the idea of medication. This tipping point-based test needs to be both physical and mental for it to be true. Otherwise, it's not true. Emergence sees a thing as fractal. The fractal is simply it is. All candle flames are candle flames. So this test applies to all temporary change. How about medication? Well, consider how people have to use willpower to keep taking the pills, to remember them, etc., etc. Willpower proves that you're doing something that is challenging your nature. How about emergence, right? Right now people would be going, okay, know-it-all, okay, whatever, you know. What happens with the emergence? Well, with the emergence, no willpower is required to remember the aha. That is not saying that there isn't a momentum of years of behaviors and thinking that then has to get revisited as life brings the things up. When they're revisited, what happens then? Do you have to say to yourself, I should work on this? Well, if it's a piece of the injury that has not yet been addressed, and we will talk about exactly what this means in the next talk. If it's a piece that hasn't been addressed yet, then yes. But the willingness to work on it requires no willpower. There's a desire, a curiosity. What would it be like if I didn't have that? That's the two that are one when you've had an emergence about something where you've been injured. For instance, anger. So were this person, this woman I've talked about, Kelly, were she to have a point where she really lost her temper on a day, perhaps in front of her kids, or her husband, or whoever, it doesn't matter, were she to have that come up, there would be two things that would come up. One thing would be, there'd probably be a part of her that would feel bad that she was doing this again, because she's a 2, and 2s naturally feel if anything they do hurts someone, it's their fault. This is just automatic. So she'd probably feel bad about it, right? But the other side that would be there without any willpower whatsoever would be a joy that she could finally see that all human beings have anger. This is not a rational thing. This is human nature. And that if she couldn't get angry, that she would likely be in a hospital being treated for major depression, some sort of anxiety, something huge. The more you resist who you are, the more that thing persists inside you. I've learned this from my Buddhist friends. Right. Emergence allows you to alter your sense of your nature, your vision of your nature, the places that you can learn. Emergence allows you to learn in a way that every time the thing comes up again, you now have not only the negative feelings of all the years you've had this, but you also have the positive feelings wherein you see, I want to learn more about who I am. If you have had an emergence, that is one of the things you have. And that curiosity, that wanting to learn about yourself, it requires no willpower whatsoever. You simply have that feeling of curiosity now. This has been another of these long talks. And unusual for me. There's been no drawing, even though I have some kind of a page I'm referring this to. But I want you to see that what I'm going to do in the next talks is I'm going to talk about a series of 4 things. I am going to talk about the idea of when you emerge from a wound, what explains how much is left and how much you've healed. There are going to be 2 drawings about this. When symptoms recur, what does that mean? Often people believe that, oh gee, the thing they did didn't work. That's not true. But you need to see evidence from me, don't take my word. We're going to do 2 ways of looking at that. We're going to look at a way to move from talk therapy words, issues, to using words in a way that they affect the body and potentially help the person to heal. That will be another talk. And in the last talk in this series, I'm going to talk about how I discovered these things about wounds and healing. How I discovered that startles are the essence, the necessary thing for getting wounded, and that epiphanies, emergences, pleasant surprises, realizations are the only way to heal those things. And what does healing mean? Well, what am I going to talk about? It's not going to be the theory yet. That's way later. What I'm going to talk about is something that I mentioned at the beginning that I did not do in this talk, which is I'm going to talk about the events that happened in my life in a series of 2 months, August and September 1996. I'm going to talk about that series of things and how that is where everything I have been teaching you and will teach you, that's where it all came from. A simple series of events that happened to me in those 2 months. Why am I nervous about it? Because it involves some things that, to some people, they'll write me off. In any way, I'm going to leave you with that. And as always, I hope that you are well and happy, and I am so glad that you have joined our little community.